Hi, it's Katrina. The Exorcist Army. The Vatican has secretly been building an army of exorcists, and they've been doing it for years. What most people don't know is that the Vatican holds an annual exorcism course. In 2018, the BBC did a story on how 250 priests from 50 countries arrived in Rome specifically to learn about demonic possession. They were attending the annual exorcism convention, an event where young priests are able to learn all about expelling demons, and they also get to hear first-hand accounts of demon possession from other priests. The Vatican's week-long exorcism course is officially called Exorcism and the Prayer of Liberation. The class opened in 2005 to recruit exorcists all across the globe. The event costs around $370 and goes through the psychological, theological, and practical business of exorcising demons. If this all seems surprising to you, just wait. Catholic priests claim demonic possessions are on the rise, which is why the Vatican started the course in the first place. Hundreds of priests are attending the class every year because apparently there is an outbreak of genuine spiritual disturbances. Annually, there's about 500,000 people in Italy that undergo exorcisms in order to expel their demons. Some have blamed the increase in exorcisms on the decline in Christianity, and others think social media plays a role. There are even people who claim that the rise in superstitious practices has contributed to the surge in demonic possession. Whatever the case, the Vatican is definitely not short on exorcists. With every passing year, more and more priests are being trained in this ancient practice. What do you think? Does exorcism actually work? Let me know in the comments below. The Rwandan Genocide. In 2017, Pope Francis acknowledged that Catholic priests and nuns were partly responsible for the Rwandan Genocide, which took place in 1994. The Pope himself publicly asked for forgiveness for the role the Church played during the genocide, stating that the priests and nuns succumbed to hatred and violence. The 1994 Rwandan genocide was one of the most recent acts of unbelievable racial persecution perpetrated by human beings. 800,000 people were slaughtered over a short span of only 100 days. The exact nature of the genocide is extremely complex, but to simplify it, the ethnic Tutsis of Rwanda were hunted and killed by the Hutu extremists in a wave of unprecedented violence. This event started when the Hutu president, Juvenal Habyarimana, was killed after his plane was shot out of the sky. The Presidential Guard immediately encouraged violence throughout the capital, and a militia took up the call and began hunting down and massacring Tutsi people. Surprisingly, priests and nuns took part in the bloodshed and cruelty as well. When people sought refuge in churches, they were butchered like trapped animals. A priest by the name of Father Saromba even ordered his church to be destroyed while there were 2,000 people taking shelter inside of it. The Catholic Church has never really recovered from the bad press they received following the genocide, at least not in Africa. The issue was that the church had been compromised by its political ties with the ruling Hutu elite, the very people behind the genocide. Members of the church not only watched the massacre unfold without trying to stop it, but they also refused to accept it as a genocide when it was all over. The Dead Pope Trial. In the year 897 AD, Pope Formosus was put on trial 9 months after his death. His body was dug out of the ground, and his rotting corpse was seated on a throne to participate in a real trial that found the Pope guilty on all accounts. The dead man's trial was one of the most absurd and grotesque events in the Vatican's long history. Formosus was elected pope in 891 AD, and he remained in office until 896 AD, when he suffered a stroke and passed away. However, many people believe he was poisoned due to the enemies he'd made in Constantinople, Italy, and those in power within the church. He was what you might call a good pope, and he tried to do the right things for the people. When he died, there were riots in the streets of Rome. The citizens were angry to hear of his passing, but the ruling elite was happy because they considered Formosus to be a pest. The Vatican instated Pope Boniface VI shortly after, but he died 2 weeks later from what was likely another poisoning. He was quickly succeeded by Stephen VI, and Boniface's entire reign was declared null and void by the Church. Pope Stephen absolutely hated Formosus, and after he took the throne, he jumped at the opportunity to humiliate his old rival. He put the dead man on trial and accused him of perjury, coveting the papacy, and violating church canons. Formosus was found guilty on all accounts and was stripped of his title as pope. To add insult to injury, the same 3 fingers he once used to bless people were cut off. He was then dumped in a dirty old commoner's grave to humiliate him one last time. But karma is real, and Pope Stephen VI got what was coming to him. The people revolted against him, and as a result, he was thrown in jail. Then in the summer of 897, the same year Formosus' trial took place, Stephen was mysteriously strangled to death. The Grimoire of Pope Honorius. A grimoire is basically a textbook of magic, and may typically contain instructions on how to do everything from perform magic to create powerful objects, such as amulets or talismans. Many grimoires from the Middle Ages delve deep into the theology of magic, and they explain how to conjure up supernatural creatures like angels and demons. They can also teach people how to properly use charms and divinations. Most of the time, these books were used by witches, necromancers, and heretics who did the devil's work. However, there is a 17th century grimoire which was supposedly written by a pope of the Vatican. The book is called the Grimoire of Pope Honorius, supposedly authored by Pope Honorius III. He became the ruler of the Catholic Church on July 18, 1216, and he remained in power up until his death in 1227. The first edition of the Grimoire supposedly showed up 402 years later in 1629. If he really was the author, Pope Honorius was into some seriously evil magic. Many modern historians believe the Grimoire was a clever forgery designed specifically to deceive ignorant priests. Because the book caught the attention of learned religious scholars who might be curious in the ways of evil magic and necromancy, giving it a pope's name made it even more legitimate. Then again, it really could have been authored by the pope 400 years earlier, but nobody can confirm or deny this. All we have is a magical book used by priests in the 17th century as a way to summon demons, and there is no way to know who the true author is. The Vatileaks Scandal. The Vatileaks scandal was groundbreaking in 2012. Several Vatican documents were leaked, and they exposed corruption in a new light that shook the church to its core. Italian journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi published letters from Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, which revealed crimes committed by the church that were condoned by the Pope himself. Nothing particularly incriminating was exposed, but by bringing the documents to light, Nuzzi revealed an unholy nest of conspiracies and toxic ambition. He was able to prove, once and for all, that even in modern times, the church is a hotbed of rivalry and corruption. The scandal involved Pope Benedict XVI, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, the Vatican Secretary of State, and many others. These documents made the public aware of a power struggle between the top members of the church over control of the Vatican Bank, as well as control over the Vatican's future. The documents were likely leaked by the Pope's butler, Paolo Gabriele, who was swiftly arrested. By the time the scandal was finished, the Vatican was shown to be a bureaucratic nest of liars. The Vatican's Secret Tribunal. There is a secret confession tribunal inside the Vatican which handles some of the most atrocious sins that only the Pope himself can grant absolution. The tribunal has been around for 830 years, and for the first time the faithful are getting a peek into the Vatican's secret way of absolving sins so terrible that only the Pope can reconcile them. It's called the Tribunal of Conscience, and it's responsible for hearing confessions of those who defile the Eucharist, believed to be the body and blood of Jesus by the Catholics. This is usually something that happens during satanic rituals, but it can also be done by those who receive communion. If a priest breaks the trust of a confessional and reveals the sins of someone who sought penance, they too must be dealt with by the tribunal. Priests who participate in adult activities of the intimate variety are also taken care of here. Without these sins being absolved, they would end in an excommunication from the church. But if the wrongdoings are resolved and absolution is granted, the priests can go on doing whatever they want, like nothing ever happened. Centuries of abuse. According to the LA Times, Roman Catholic officials have recently been facing an estimated 800 sexual abuse lawsuits in California. Church officials argue that only a short while ago they learned that their priests had been acting extremely inappropriately with children. A report by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles said the bishops and cardinals didn't know about the abuse until 1985, when accusations were brought to light. But this was all lies. A priest from North Carolina, along with a pair of former monks, have discovered ancient Vatican records and long-lost texts written in Latin. These old documents prove the problem goes back 1,700 years. The Church has known about its abusive priests for almost 2 millennia, pretty much since the beginning of the Catholic Church. Father Thomas P. Doyle said the idea that the present scandal is isolated to our modern era is debunked by the Church's own documents. One of these texts is a record from the 4th century AD, describing how St. Basil of Caesarea came up with a system of punishment to deal with priests at the monastery who couldn't keep their hands off little boys. Perpetrators were flogged and then put in chains for 6 months. They were also banned from interacting with minors. This kind of thing has been going on since the 3rd century, and the Church has never put a stop to it. Nazi escape routes. Following the end of World War II, an estimated 90% of Nazis who escaped Europe did so by fleeing from Germany across the Alps and into Italy, the home of the Vatican. Their first stop was the Monastery of the Teutonic Order in Murano, located in South Tyrol. War criminals would then continue their journey from monastery to monastery until they ultimately made it to Rome. Once they arrived in Rome, Nazis who had special letters from the Catholic Church were given a passport that allowed them to flee Europe and move somewhere else, like South America. The International Committee of the Red Cross issued about 120,000 of these passport papers up until 1951. Even before the war ended, the Nazis in positions of power had an escape plan, and it was all orchestrated by the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church, many of whom were active inside the Vatican. For example, Austrian Bishop Aloy Hudal notoriously made himself a Nazi sympathizer during the war. Then, when the war was over, he provided as many Nazis as he could with false identity papers so they could avoid persecution. The Bible Code. The Bible Code is a controversial book that was written by Michael Drosnin. In this book, Michael claims that he discovered a secret code in the Bible itself, and that its implications are deeply shocking. He believes the Bible isn't a collection of stories about a man named Jesus Christ, but instead is evidence of a mighty supernatural consciousness. He claims that it reveals the existence of an entity from an ancient civilization that created the Bible as a way to warn humanity about a great disaster that will take place in the future. The Bible supposedly predicted the assassination of JFK, World War II, the Holocaust, the atomic bomb. This was all revealed through ELS, or the equidistant letter sequence method. This process is a random way of coming up with words and phrases in a large collection of text. For example, you pick a place on the page and then move in any direction, plucking out letters at certain intervals until you create a word. You then do that repeatedly until you've come up with an extremely vague sentence that seems to be a message of the future. However, this method has been widely discredited as nonsense. People have said that ELS can be used to produce desired results. Brandon McKay, an Australian mathematician, apparently used the ELS method in the book Moby Dick to find a warning of the assassination of Martin Luther King, among other predictions. Some say the Bible is unique, filled with secret codes, but most people think this assumption is nothing but wishful thinking. The heresy of the Knights Templar. Hidden in the Vatican secret archive is a document regarding the trial against the Knights Templar, one of the worst things that ever happened in the Church's history. It was the first truly public example of the Church's corruption, and it showed just how closely connected the religious leaders were to the royal families of Europe. The Knights Templar, originally known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, were founded in 1119. They swore to protect Christian pilgrims en route to the Holy Land after Jerusalem's capture in the First Crusade. These great warriors soon amassed a significant amount of wealth, and by the 13th century, their power had grown significantly. It grew so much that King Philip IV of France felt threatened. He didn't like how much money the Templars had, and he wasn't particularly fond of their influence over society, and so the king accused them of heresy. In 1312, Pope Clement ordered the Templars be disbanded for the good of the church. With their names sullied and their reputation destroyed, it was easy for King Philip to round up the Templars and burn them alive at the stake, labeling them as heretics. Then, in 2001, a document was discovered in the Vatican archives known as the Chignon Parchment. This text contains phrases written by Pope Clement V absolving the Templars of the charge of heresy. It's absolute proof that the church was well aware that the Templars weren't guilty of what they were accused of. At the time, the leaders of the church caved under the pressure from King Philip and allowed them to be burned alive anyway.
The Vatican Samurai. There was once a samurai in the Vatican named Hasekura Rokuemon Tsunenaga. He was a Japanese samurai who led a diplomatic mission to the Vatican in 1613 that didn't end until 1620. He first traveled through New Spain, the place we currently call Mexico, and then sailed from Veracruz to various ports across Europe. He met the King of Spain as well as Pope Paul V and delivered letters from the daimyo of Sendai. In ancient Japan, a daimyo was an extremely powerful feudal overlord, almost like a king. This particular feudal overlord, named Date Masamune, wished to trade with Spain. He even invited Catholic missionaries to travel to Japan. It was all part of a clever scheme to become even more powerful by establishing trading links with the empires of Europe, specifically the Catholic Church. But things didn't turn out quite the way the daimyo was hoping. In fact, this one expedition may have helped prevent the spread of Christianity into Japan. When Hasekura arrived back from the Vatican, Christianity was outlawed 2 days later. A decree against all Christians was put into place, saying that they needed to abandon their faith immediately or be exiled. But in reality, nobles would be exiled, while ordinary peasants and servants would be killed for practicing Christianity. There were even rewards offered for anyone who could catch a hiding Christian and turn them in. But what in the world happened? The daimyo had been willing to let the Christians come to Japan, but 2 days after his emissaries' return, he was executing them. Nobody knows what Hasekura said to make the feudal warlord change his mind. All we know is that after meeting the King of Spain and spending time at the Vatican, the samurai returned to Japan and Christianity was suddenly forbidden. While there is no way of knowing for sure, this expedition may have prevented Christianity from ever taking hold in Japan, like it did in other places, like the Philippines. What do you think happened? Do you think the samurai was mistreated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Isaac Brill and Avery Helfrich for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about historical mysteries and amazing discoveries. The Cave of Revelation. Out of everything written in the New Testament, the Book of Revelation contains by far some of the most shocking and disturbing stories. The Book of Revelation is all about the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ. However, the book is amazing for another reason. It's one of the only books of the Bible that scientists and historians know exactly where it was written. Around the year 95 AD, John the theologian was banished to the Greek island of Patmos. At the time, the Romans were using the island as a penal colony, which is a settlement that's typically established in order to punish criminals. John, Jesus' own disciple and one of the 12 apostles, was sent there by Emperor Domitian, and while he was there, he wrote the Book of Revelation in a cave, all because of a series of visions that were supposedly shown to him by God. According to tradition, John heard the voice of God speak to him through fissures in the cave wall. He wrote down every last thing God said, and that eventually became the Book of Revelation. Nobody can say for sure what happened inside that cave 1,900 years ago, but it's still a place of pilgrimage that thousands of Christians travel to every year. The pilgrims visit the cave, which is now named the Cave of the Apocalypse, and touch the cracks in the wall where the voice of God spoke to John. The Euphrates Apocalypse. The Euphrates River is starting to run dry. This is a huge problem for Middle Eastern countries that for thousands of years have relied on the constant flow of water down the river. Iraq, Syria, and Turkey all need that water. Some of the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia depended on the Euphrates River to irrigate the land and make the soil fertile for their crops. It's thanks to this river that many of the most powerful kingdoms rose out of the mud. But the river is famous for another reason that many people don't know about. In the Book of Revelation, the Euphrates River is supposedly a prison for demons. When the seventh seal is opened by the Lamb of God and silence falls upon heaven, 7 angels appear before God and each one sounds their trumpet. As each trumpet sounds, a terrible calamity befalls the people of the earth. It's made even worse because prior to the angels and the trumpets, the world already had to deal with the 7 seals being opened, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and all manner of tribulations. The moon already turned red with blood, and yet the angels and their trumpets still make things worse. It's the 6th angel that wakes the demons bound beneath the Euphrates River. The Bible says that as the 6th angel blows the trumpet of judgment, the 4 fallen angels bound beneath the river are released. These angels then go on to kill a third of humanity. They then lead an army of 200,000 soldiers to seduce the leaders of the world and prepare for the battle against Jesus. However, when the angel blows their horn, the Euphrates River goes bone dry. Many are worried that since the river has started to go dry, the end of days could be upon us. But could that really be true? What do you think? Let us know down below. The Metal Codices. Several years ago, an ordinary man from an Arab village in northern Israel approached a group of British scientists. This man had in his possession a collection of 70 metal books that supposedly date back 2,000 years. He claimed these books were inscribed in ancient Hebrew and that they even contained the earliest known likeness of Jesus Christ. At first, it seemed like a bit of a hoax, but when the metallurgy report came back dating the books to the 1st century, historians realized the importance of what they'd found. According to David Elkington, a member of the British research team, the Metal Codices could be the earliest known Christian documents in existence. But where in the world did these metal books come from? They were supposedly found in a cave near the Jordan River. This was a place where early Christians worshipped in secret to avoid Roman persecution. Unfortunately, though, nobody knows where exactly they were found or who recovered them. The man who originally approached the British scientists said it was his grandfather who accidentally found the codices in the 1920s while he was tending to a flock of sheep. But others say the books were illegally excavated and then sold to the herder. The discovery made big news in 2011, but since then, almost no information has been revealed. Scientists are supposedly studying the codices, but it's been over a decade now. Sadly, whatever secrets were written on the metal sheets are currently lost. Moses on drugs. Benny Shannon, an Israeli professor, recently made the shocking claim that Moses was on drugs. Moses received the 10 commandments from God, met the burning bush, and led the Israelites out of Egypt, and apparently he was also on some heavy psychedelic drugs. According to Shannon, who's a professor at Hebrew University, Moses was taking psychoactive substances not unlike ones found in the Amazon jungle. Similar substances that are combined into a mystical drink called ayahuasca may have been consumed by Moses atop Mount Sinai in Egypt. Benny says the events on Mount Sinai that are detailed in the Book of Exodus were either supernatural or based on a legend. The only other explanation is that something very real happened on the mountain thanks to the effects of narcotics. Benny is a strong believer in the latter option. He says the burning bush was nothing but a hallucination. He also says the thunder, lightning, and blaring trumpet blasts were the effects of the hallucinogenic drugs. Moses was likely joined by others who shared in the psychedelic experience and who may have helped write down what happened, and later their writings became part of the Bible. But what kind of proof does the professor have? It always comes down to proof. And unfortunately for Benny, he doesn't have much. He's explained that there are existing plants in the Sinai Peninsula that have extreme psychoactive components, but there is no physical proof that Moses was tripping when he encountered the burning bush. But then again, there's no physical evidence that Moses ever existed at all. If Benny is to be believed, the 10 Commandments were just 10 ideas dreamed up by some ancient shepherds who got bored and ate a few too many psychoactive plants. The Gospel of Jesus' Wife. On an ancient piece of papyrus, scientists discovered what might be the earliest mention of Jesus having a wife. It happened in September of 2012, when historian Karen King from Harvard Divinity School made an announcement at an academic conference in Rome. She claimed to have discovered a fragment of papyrus with the phrase, "Jesus said to them, my wife," written on it. If the piece of papyrus proved to be a real artifact, it had the potential to change everything we know about Roman Catholic traditions. The tiny document, no larger than a business card, became known as the Gospel of Jesus' wife. It threatened to undo centuries of rigid Christian traditions. If Jesus wasn't a bachelor, and if he wasn't celibate, it would mean the church has been lying to the world for at least 2,000 years. 3 years after the discovery was announced, scholars hadn't made any progress on authenticating the document. Karen couldn't seem to come up with an answer for where the papyrus came from, saying it was gifted to her by an anonymous individual. Then the piece of paper ended up in the custody of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Imagine an ancient piece of paper being taken by one of the most secretive and secure organizations in the world. The Department of Homeland Security took the ancient text from where it was being housed at Harvard's Houghton Library, and it's now being labeled a forgery. Nowadays, it's hard to say what exactly happened to the piece of paper, other than that the government got involved, and suddenly it wasn't a historical discovery anymore, just a hoax. But what do you think? Why would Homeland Security get involved? Let me know any theories you have in the comments. Caves of Death in Galilee. While surveying a group of natural limestone caves in Galilee, Israel, scientists came across the remnants of ancient Jewish hiding places. Scientists found hundreds of limestone caves used as sanctuaries for Jews hiding from the Roman troops that attacked Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It was during the Great Jewish Revolt between 66 and 70 AD that people fled to the cliffside caves in mass numbers, preferring to hide in the hot and brutal desert than face the wrath of the Roman Empire. Dr. Yinon Shivtiel from the Safed Academic College was one of the men involved in the discovery. He says researchers found water cisterns carved into the natural rock, as well as shards of pottery, lost coins, and other artifacts from the 1st century. The caves even had baths and candle niches carved into them, showing just how serious the residents were about hiding from the Romans. Even though the Jewish rebels tried to fight back against their oppressors, they couldn't stand against the full might of Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus. They had no choice but to retreat to the isolated cliffs, where they lived for years as the Holy Land was torn apart. Aaron's Rod. People are always talking about the Ark of the Covenant, speculating over where the Ark might be hiding and what happened to it thousands of years ago, but nobody ever talks about what's inside the Ark. One of the artifacts supposedly hiding in this most holy of relics is a treasure straight from the Bible. It's called Aaron's Rod, and it was used to help lead the Israelites out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. In ancient Israelite culture, shepherds used rods to guide their flocks. A rod was seen as a kind of symbol of authority. When God called upon Moses, who was a shepherd, to lead the Israelites, he used Moses' rod for performing miracles. He essentially turned it into a magic wand, and God did the same with Moses' brother Aaron. But it was Aaron's rod that God used to turn the water of Egypt into blood, and when God needed to summon a plague of frogs, Aaron's rod was used a second time. In the end, God ordered that Aaron's rod be placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. It was a testimony of God's choice in picking his chosen people, the tribe of Levi. If the rod is truly a real artifact, it should still be sitting in the Ark of the Covenant today, wherever that might be. Any guesses? Let me know in the comments. The Torah Code. The Torah Code is a secret code hidden in the Hebrew text of the Torah. This secret code has supposedly predicted many significant events in history, including some recent incidents. Those who believe in the code say the election of Donald Trump was predicted, as well as the global pandemic of COVID-19. According to Rabbi Matityahu Glazerson, who studies the secret text and searches for hidden messages, the code can be used to find a warning of the coronavirus. The code uses something called ELS, or equidistant letter sequence. To make this as simple as possible, it's all about selecting letters based on numbers. If you start at the 8th letter of a specific passage and then highlight every 8th letter, you can create words. It might seem random, but a lot of times this method will spell out entire sentences. It was using this code that the rabbi managed to reveal the words coronavirus in the Torah in Hebrew letters. Keep in mind this isn't an exact science. The same rabbi who discovered the coronavirus warning in the Torah also predicted that the apocalypse would happen in 2021. And since it's currently 2023, the rabbi may not be the most reliable fortune teller. But what other predictions do you think the Torah could be hiding? Let us know in the comments. The Ketef Hinnom Scrolls. In 1979, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls were discovered in a cave, just like all the greatest religious discoveries typically are. All the most important scrolls seem to be found in dark and spooky caverns. These particular scrolls are the oldest surviving texts of the Hebrew Bible, written 600 years before the birth of Christ. The text is in an ancient Hebrew script, a version much older than the modern Hebrew alphabet still used today. The text includes excerpts from the Book of Numbers and the Book of Deuteronomy. When these scrolls were found in the 1970s, it was extremely exciting. Gabriel Barkay, a professor at Tel Aviv University, originally thought the site of Ketef Hinnom was empty. The cave had last been used for storing rifles during the Ottoman period. It was totally by chance that his assistant, a 13-year-old boy, came across a collapsed ceiling and the remains of a chamber. It was inside the chamber that Gabriel found the 2 silver scrolls. They were written around the 7th century BC, during the time of the First Temple. The Book of St Cyprien. The Book of St Cyprien is believed to have been written by St Cyprien of Antioch, a pagan sorcerer who lived in the 3rd century AD. The book is what we call a grimoire, a sacred text of magical knowledge. This particular grimoire isn't a single text, but is composed of multiple pieces of literature whose origins are entirely unknown. Some have said the grimoire is made of writings that were created as recently as the 19th century. Many believe it was Saint Cyprien himself who filled the grimoire with all his knowledge of the black arts, including how to summon spirits and conjure devils. There is a lot going on inside the grimoire. It contains healing spells, prayers to the angels, examples of love magic, divination, and even instructions that explain how to perform exorcisms. There is also a bizarre section of the book that contains the locations of alleged buried treasures throughout Galicia in Spain. You might want to check it out and make notes. It also discusses animal magnetism, which was something made popular by German doctor Franz Mesmer in the 18th century. Animal magnetism is all about the invisible natural force which resides in all living things. It's a hypothetical force, though one that's been used in magic for thousands of years. At the end of the day, nobody knows who the true author of the book was. It may have been an ancient sorcerer, or it could have been multiple authors compiling their knowledge into one collection of texts. There is a version of the grimoire in Portuguese and in Spanish, and there is even a Scandinavian copy that dates back to 1529. No matter which version you read, the hidden secrets, spells, and dark magic are all the same. Huge shout out to Bob Ham for the super thanks! We wouldn't be here without support from viewers like you. And we really appreciate your feedback. If you are new to the channel, welcome! Be sure to subscribe and join the family. Ferdinand I's disturbing behavior. King Ferdinand I of Naples was one seriously sick and twisted individual. The 15th century monarch was one of the only rulers in history who created a museum of corpses as a way to frighten those who would challenge him. Ferdinand was known for his cruelty and for his own private collection of mummies. His father was Alfonso I of Naples, King of Sicily, King of Aragon, and King of Naples up until his death in 1458. When he passed away, Ferdinand was the only successor to the throne, even though he was Alfonso's illegitimate son. He was 35 years old when he became the king. He had a massive kingdom to oversee and had a lot of enemies who didn't believe he had a genuine claim to the throne. Over the years, Ferdinand had to fight many battles to legitimize himself. And as the years went on, he became more and more brutal. Any nobles who opposed him wound up being killed before they had a chance to take the fight to Ferdinand. As all this was going on, Ferdinand started doing something extremely unusual. He collected the bodies of his defeated enemies and mummified them. He then put them on public display in something he called the Black Museum. Ferdinand had his servants embalm anyone who stood against him, and then their preserved bodies were put into his personal museum. This gruesome display acted as a warning to anyone who would so much as think about treason. What do you think? Would it work for you? The Black Museum was an official institution until Ferdinand's death in 1494. He lived a long and healthy life as king, presumably because nobody dared to mess with him. Iraqi cave demons. Archaeologists discovered a mysterious clay tablet in an Iraqi cave. The tablet was made 2,700 years ago, inscribed with a figure that experts say is likely a demon. The tablet shows a horned creature, part goat and part human. The monster stands with hoofed feet, a forked tongue, and a tail. Scientists from a museum in Berlin say the demon is named Benu. He was the ancient Assyrian demon associated with epilepsy. Whenever somebody in ancient Assyria suffered from a seizure, a fit of insanity, or a sudden loss of consciousness, they were assumed to be possessed by the demon Benu. The demonic entity was depicted as a goat because sufferers of epilepsy often cried out like a screaming goat, leading to the association. This is now one of the oldest artistic representations of a known demon. It goes back to the ancient Assyrian belief that all diseases were inflicted by either angry gods or malicious spirits. And just like how a modern exorcist might banish a demon from someone who is possessed, the Assyrians believed such things could be cured through rituals. It was genuinely thought that demons like Benu could be forced from the body by shamans, thereby curing the afflicted. This newly found tablet is a testimony of the power demons had over Assyrian society. The Thevak Demon. Two of the most popular horror movies that have come out in the past few years include The Nun and The Conjuring. But did you know that the demon depicted in these films is in fact a real demon that allegedly terrorized people in the 17th century? The demon's name is Valak, and he appears in multiple medieval grimoires. Books on demonology and black magic once spoke of a sinister demon that would appear in the form of a child. The demon would then conjure spirits to do his evil bidding. He could summon serpent spirits from hell or possess living snakes. The demon Valak made his first appearance in the Key of Solomon when it was officially published sometime in the 1600s. Owen Davies, a professor and expert on witchcraft from the University of Hertfordshire, says the Key of Solomon was a book on how to command good and evil spirits. The book contains similar spells and instructions used by the great King Solomon from the Old Testament, who lived around the 2nd century BC. That would technically make Valak a demon dating back to before the days of Christ, 2,200 years ago. Out of the 72 demons listed in the grimoire, Valak is the 62nd. The book describes him as appearing like a boy with angel wings and riding on the back of a two-headed dragon. According to the text, his special power is to find snakes, locate hidden treasures, and command an army of no less than 30 demons. There is no scientific way of knowing if Valak was ever real, yet his name has persisted through time. It's a little shocking to think that such an obscure demon has been around longer than Christianity. What do you think? Do you believe in demons? Let me know in the comments. The London Dungeon. The London Dungeon is a tourist attraction in the heart of London, England. The dungeon recreates some of the most ghoulish and disturbing historical events in the city's history. It's meant to be a frightening experience for visitors, while also being light and humorous in a dark kind of way. There are live actors, special effects, and even rides that are meant to make you feel like you're in old London. But recently, the horrifying history at the London Dungeon got a little too real when one of the props turned out to be real. The dungeon opened in 1974, and shortly after, a fake human skeleton was put on display as part of an exhibit. But just recently, the fake skeleton was proven to be real. According to museum curator Bill Edwards, the skeleton that was hanging in a cage at the tourist attraction was found to be a combination of human and artificial parts, something that was wired together years ago for unknown reasons. Catherine Pritchard, operations manager for the dungeon, said nobody had any idea there was a real dead body in their attraction. Nobody knows where the bones originally came from. There is speculation that the skeleton may have been smuggled from a grave over a century ago, when London doctors were using corpses for medical dissections. That's just a hunch though, and nobody really knows for sure how the skeleton made its way into the dungeon. Ramses V. Ramses V died in 1157 BC. For about 4 years, he was a mighty pharaoh who ruled over Egypt with an iron fist. But then he was forcefully removed from the throne. His death didn't come from a battle, and it certainly didn't come from an accident. Instead, scientists believe Ramses V passed away after becoming infected with smallpox. He is the first known casualty of what happens to be the only disease scientists have ever eradicated. Smallpox is absolutely horrible. It's been around for over 3,000 years, spreading from one part of the world to another, usually by invading armies. The Spanish brought it to Mexico in the 16th century, resulting in the deaths of millions of Aztec people. Over the next 200 years, smallpox killed hundreds of thousands of Europeans and Americans annually. It was finally cured thanks to global vaccinations in the 1960s. When the mummy of Ramses V was studied, researchers were shocked to find evidence of smallpox. His brain was removed and replaced with linen, and so too were his eyes. His nostrils were also plugged with wax, and his organs were replaced with sawdust. His face was painted red, and his earlobes were stretched. But the weirdest part of his mummy was that researchers found small lesions on his head that looked like marks left behind by smallpox. If true, it makes him the earliest official case of the disease. Boathouse victims. On August 24th in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted. Unimaginable destruction rained down not only on the city of Pompeii, but also on its sister city of Herculaneum. Other smaller settlements near the Bay of Naples experienced similar destruction. But while Pompeii was consumed by ash, Herculaneum was attacked by something known as pyroclastic flow. This is essentially a burst of ash, gas, and rock that spewed straight from a volcano. It was an intense explosion that killed every living thing in its path. Since the 1980s, scientists have been searching through the ruins of Herculaneum to reconstruct early Roman life. They have found about 340 victims of the volcano. But here's the crazy thing. 152 of those victims were found clumped inside of a boathouse at the edge of the city. Many of the victims had been baked to death. The heat was so intense that, according to biological expert Miguel Villar, their brains may have been turned into glass. It's the same kind of heat that turns sand into glass. This was a sad and terrifying experience for the victims of Herculaneum. The collection of bodies found in the boathouse is one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking discoveries ever made here. These people likely sheltered together in fear, then found themselves being either cooked alive or suffocated by the noxious fumes. Anasazi Cannibals. For at least 2,000 years, the ancient Anasazi civilization occupied a huge part of the southwestern United States. The center of their civilization was Chaco Canyon, which reached its height between 850 and 1250 AD. Have you ever been there? Let me know in the comments. It was here where the ancient people of the desert got together to trade, engage in ritual ceremonies, and participate in politics. They built huge housing complexes and temples that they used to observe the stars. So it seemed as though they were extremely prosperous people. But then, around 800 years ago, all that started to change. The rain suddenly stopped, and drought killed their crops. And as a result, the Anasazi abandoned their homeland and ultimately vanished. Scientists still don't know what happened to these people. But there's something even more shocking. The Anasazi may have been bloodthirsty cannibals. At the archaeological site of Cowboy Wash, an abandoned Anasazi village, archaeologists found 7 human remains. And apparently, these ancient corpses showed evidence of cannibalism. We don't know how widespread it was, but the Anasazi definitely ate human flesh at some point. It could be that the community ran out of food and had no choice but to start eating each other. However, it could also be part of a ritual that scientists can't even begin to understand. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The skeletons on Holy Island. Construction workers in Northumberland, England, found 7 graves in a parking lot during a recent building project. The graves are from the medieval times, and they were discovered at a place called Holy Island, or Lindisfarne. This place has an extremely rich history, with a monastery being founded on the rocky outcrop of land around 634. It was the Irish monk St. Aidan who turned the thin piece of land into a holy pilgrimage site. Holy Island was also home to St. Cuthbert, patron saint of Northumberland. In the early medieval days, Northumberland was largely controlled by the Angles and the Vikings. They left settlements all along the coastline to facilitate trade. Then, when the Normans invaded in the 11th century, they started building castles and towns. But no matter who was in control of the land, Holy Island remained a religious sanctuary, home to monks. These 7 skeletons were found buried beneath the foundations of the parking lot, but nobody knows who they were or how they got there. In the near future, researchers are hoping to do testing on the human remains and learn more about the ancient history of one of Britain's holiest destinations, a gateway to hell. The gateway to hell has been found in rural England of all places. In a small cave in the East Midlands, a short walk from 2 major highways, there is a portal to the underworld that was once used by demons and witches to terrorize humanity. At least that's what it seems like. Heritage experts recently revealed a collection of ancient markings inside the cave related to witchcraft. This is currently the biggest collection of witch markings found anywhere in the UK. Letters, symbols, and strange patterns were etched into the cold rock at a time when belief in witchcraft had Britain engulfed in hysteria. The markings date back to the 16th century, but nobody really knows what they were for. Expert Alison Fearn from Leicester University says they were likely protective marks. But what they were meant to protect is unknown. Who the markings were intended to keep out or in the dark and creepy cave is also a complete mystery. There may have been a witch that lived here, or perhaps the locals were afraid of cave demons. They might have even thought the cave was a portal to hell itself. And in order to protect themselves, the ancient people who lived here etched protective markings into the cave. You have to admit, caves would have been pretty creepy back in the day. The Vatican's secret mummification program. The Vatican once embarked on a secret project to mummify the holiest among us. On April 27, 2014, Pope Francis declared Pope John XXIII a saint. He also declared John Paul II a saint. But the former is far more interesting, since he is currently entombed in a glass coffin. When Pope John XXIII died in 1963, his body was embalmed, and he was turned into a modern mummy, then put on display for tourists in a glass box. The Pope's body was essentially used in a 40-year experiment. The Church went through a phase of trying to maintain their holy relics by any means necessary. And not surprisingly, they got their inspiration for the mummification process from ancient Egypt. The Vatican put together an elite team of embalmers, men who spent their entire lives preserving corpses, and got to work preserving a total of 31 people. The Church chose 31 saints and servants of God to be given the mummy treatment between 1975 and 2008. The inspiration may have come from the ancient Egyptians, but the idea is solidified in the Catholic belief of incorruptibility. Catholics believed that if a body didn't decay, that person was holy. So, for a long time, the Church would allow anyone to become a saint if their corpse didn't spoil after they died. It's no longer considered a miracle because people obviously abused the rule. They would use oils and herbs to attempt preservation. People would even stuff plants into the muscle cavities of dead popes to try and stop their bodies from decaying. One of the weirder examples of this was in 1958 with the death of Pope Pius XII. The Vatican wanted to preserve his body forever, and so they used a special wrapping technique similar to what they thought was given to Jesus after his death. But ultimately, it failed. Just days after the Pope passed away, his nose fell off, and a member of the Swiss Guard reportedly fainted because the body smelled so bad. But why exactly was a team of embalmers put together in 1975? It's because across the globe, the body parts of dead saints are venerated as holy objects, but most of them are rapidly decaying. You can only keep a severed arm for so long before it starts to rot. The whole embalming fad, inspired by ancient Egypt, was a way to try and preserve all these body parts so that they would remain holy treasures forever. Big shout out to Joe Pies and a big happy birthday to God of Destruction Liquior. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. We'd love to have you. The Egyptian origin. Christianity appeared in the 1st century AD as an alternative form of Judaism. During this time, there was a vast array of beliefs in the Roman Empire, which controlled Egypt. Early Christians were seen as a fringe group of Jews whose extremist leader failed to establish the kingdom he tried to create when he was killed by the Romans. It was a real fluke that Christianity caught on the way it did, forming an independent religion and becoming even more powerful than the much older religion of Judaism. Christianity can thank its success to the hard work that was completed by the Egyptians in the many years before. A lot of Christianity's premier features were either directly copied by ancient Egyptian religion or inspired by it. At least that's what scholars are saying. For example, let's take a look at the Holy Trinity. For thousands of years, Egypt believed in the Holy Trinity too, only theirs was a lot different. They had the father, Osiris, the mother, Isis, and the son, Horus. The legend of Horus even says that he was born from a virgin mother, which is exactly what the Bible says about Jesus Christ. Christianity took the core features of ancient Egyptian myth and tweaked them slightly. Instead of gods with crocodile heads, Christianity used humans in its stories. Their Messiah was a human man, and yet he was also a divine being. This might not seem like such a big deal, but it was obviously huge because it converted most of the globe. The running theory is that by changing the Egyptian formula and using humans as their religious representatives instead of bizarre animal gods, early devotees were much more inclined to offer up their faith. It was easier to worship a human messiah than a goddess with a hippo head. What do you think about this theory? Let me know in the comments below. The Obelisk. In the square in front of St. Peter's Basilica is one of the most recognizable landmarks on the planet. On days like Easter or during midnight mass, there can be up to 100,000 people gathered around the central pillar in the Vatican's great courtyard. But how many of them know that the obelisk was taken from Egypt? The Romans were responsible for stealing the monument, and afterward they brought it back to Rome, where it's been ever since. Technically, the obelisk is a stolen object, and Egypt likely wouldn't mind having it back. In ancient Egypt, an obelisk was the physical representation of a pharaoh's immortality. They were typically constructed in pairs and were placed outside temples or other places of importance. Although there were likely hundreds during the peak years of the pharaohs, there are only about half a dozen still standing in Egypt, but there are far more outside Egypt. Rome, for example, has 13 obelisks, more than twice as many as Egypt. There are also ancient obelisks in London, Istanbul, Paris, and New York. The one in Paris is called the Luxor obelisk and was a piece of stolen history given to the Parisians by the Romans in 1829. The Vatican obelisk was built around 4,500 years ago. The single pillar of rock is about 1,500 years older than the city of Rome itself. It was Emperor Caligula who took the obelisk from Alexandria in 37 AD. The monument would eventually be placed inside the Circus of Nero, where rich Romans held chariot races and public executions. Weirdly enough, the Egyptian obelisk is standing in almost the exact same spot where St. Peter, the first pope, was allegedly crucified upside down in 64 AD. The entirety of the Vatican is built over the ancient playground of Roman emperors. The obelisk has been in its current spot since 1585, when it was moved by order of Pope Sixtus V. It apparently took 900 men with 140 horses nearly 6 months to complete the task, moving the obelisk only a few hundred feet from where it had been before. It currently stands 83.6 feet tall and weighs a whopping 326 tons. Egyptian treasures. The Vatican has its very own museum, filled with priceless treasures, ancient jewels, and relics spanning most of human history. The museum was founded long ago in 1506 and is bigger than you could ever imagine. It would take you an entire day to peruse the seemingly endless labyrinth of hallways, art galleries, display cases, and great vaulted chambers. There are over 70,000 artifacts held in the museum that we know of, but only 20,000 of those are on display. The rest are kept in a secret vault, not seen by anyone except for the Vatican Museum staff. One of the most fascinating places in the whole complex is a section devoted strictly to ancient Egypt. In the Belvedere Palace is the Gregorian Egyptian Museum, which has 9 rooms that are filled to the brim with Egyptian secrets. The collection is held inside the former apartment of Pope Pius IV from the 16th century. But the founder of the museum was Pope Gregory XVI, who was obsessed with ancient Egypt. Gregory ruled the Vatican from 1831 to 1846, a time when much of the world was interested in the ancient Egyptians. The hieroglyphics had just been deciphered thanks to the Rosetta Stone, and everyone wanted a piece of the past. Being head of the Papal States, Gregory was able to institute his own personal museum of Egyptian history. And so he ordered that all artifacts within his domain be gathered and put on display in a single place. There are many amazing artifacts that you can see at the Vatican today. They have statues from the Roman occupation of Egypt, back when the Egyptian gods like Anubis suddenly found themselves being dressed in Roman togas. What you might not know is that in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the Romans started merging the Egyptian gods with their own. Anubis, in particular, was extremely popular and was mixed with the Roman god Mercury. There are also coffins, statues of long-forgotten queens, and pieces of Egyptian history we likely don't even know about yet. After hundreds of years of pillaging tombs and temples, experts don't even know where some of the artifacts came from. The Desert Fathers. Shortly after the death of Christ, a group of Christian men emerged in Egypt known as the Desert Fathers. Legend has it that the first of the Desert Fathers was Paul of Thebes, but it may have also been Anthony the Great. Both men have been given credit for going out into the desert alone with nothing but the clothing on their backs to become hermits and praise Jesus. We know that around the year 270 AD, Anthony was inspired by a Sunday sermon. The priest said that a man could reach salvation and spiritual perfection by selling his possessions, donating the money to the poor, and then following Jesus. Anthony took it a step further by moving deep into the Sahara Desert and living the rest of his life in solitude. Anthony's extreme actions would earn him a position as a saint, and he was venerated after his death as the founder of desert monasticism. It may seem a little crazy today, but becoming a monk was a big deal in the early days of Christianity. Anthony the Great was one of the first, but many followed in his footsteps after. By the time Anthony passed away in 356 AD, there were thousands of monks living in the Egyptian desert. Ancient biographer Athanasius of Alexandria wrote that the desert had become a city. You may be shocked to learn just how much influence these hermits had on the development of Christianity. There were entire communities out in the desert, with the hermit monks creating the original models for Coptic Christianity in Egypt. The early Christian traditions began in the Egyptian wasteland, all receiving inspiration and guidance from the Desert Fathers. Even more modern Christian movements like the Methodist revival in England were directly influenced by these desert hermits. To this day, there are still about a dozen Christian monasteries spread throughout the Sahara. The Desert Fathers may be a thing of the past, but their influence is still strong. Do you think you could survive a life of solitude? What about a life of solitude in the desert? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to hit that subscribe button. the Nag Hammadi Library. A text fragment from 1,600 years ago could be changing what we know about Jesus Christ, the Messiah. The mysterious text comes from a discovery made in 1945. It's not exactly clear how it happened, but most stories place an Arab peasant as coming across a series of 150 caves near the ancient Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi. Inside these honeycomb caves, some natural and some carved by human hands, there were graves of the dead. The caves had been used as a necropolis 4,300 years ago in Egypt's 6th dynasty, but there was a lot more stashed inside the caverns than just human skeletons. The peasant found jars as well, which contained the ancient texts I just told you about. The only discovery comparable to this is that of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The peasants smashed jars containing over 52 texts that would become known as the Gnostic Gospels, or the secret Gospels of Jesus Christ. The biggest issue with the discovery, though, is that it was made by people who weren't archaeologists. It was a group of peasants who wanted to sell the fragments on the black market, and that was exactly what happened, with these antiquities being purchased by dealers in Cairo. Many of them did eventually get into the hands of professors and historians, but there could still be pages missing that we don't even know exist. The collection of texts is now known as the Nag Hammadi Library, composed of secret teachings Jesus gave to his disciples. We still don't know who wrote these texts or why they were stashed in a series of clay jars in an Egyptian desert, but they are all very real, and they were most likely written around the same time as the New Testament. One of the texts has received extra controversy because it says something unusual about Mary Magdalene. The text says Christ loved her more than all his other disciples, and that he'd even go as far as to kiss her on the mouth. There is also one text with the words, "my wife," included in it, referring to Mary Magdalene as the wife of the Savior. The Nag Hammadi Library has never officially been accepted as real Christian texts. But then again, the Vatican and those who control it have already removed dozens of books from the Bible. They aren't about to include a bunch of old Gospels found in clay jars, even if they are the real teachings of Jesus Christ. What do you think about all these mysterious texts? Let me know in the comments below. The Ankh. Early Christians took a lot from ancient Egyptian society, including their pagan symbols. The Ankh is one of the most easily recognizable symbols of pharaonic Egypt. It's an ancient hieroglyph that represents life itself, and it can be seen in all the oldest tombs. Even people who don't know anything about Egyptology would likely recognize it. Ancient Egyptians wore the Ankh as an amulet, just as modern Christians wear the cross around their necks. It was generally believed that anyone holding the Ankh had extra strength, and that the symbol painted in their tomb or on their coffin would give them health in the next life. Gods and goddesses were drawn on the walls of temples holding an Ankh, often while touching a dead person. This was supposed to symbolize the god or goddess granting eternal life, or in other words, resurrection. The design of the Ankh is familiar to most, although its meaning has been largely forgotten. It's a cross, only at the top there is a loop, kind of like a handle, but the bottom is still the same as a Christian cross. When Christianity started growing in popularity, it used the Ankh as its primary symbol. Early adopters of Christianity removed the handle from the top, but kept the original meaning. It was still a symbol of resurrection and eternal life, the same as it had been for 2,000 years. Many people think the cross is the sign of Jesus Christ because he was crucified on a cross, but in reality, it comes from the Egyptian Ankh. For the Coptic Christians of Egypt, the symbol hasn't even changed all that much. The Coptic cross is still the Ankh, only now it has a small cross inside of the loop at the top of the normal cross. It's essentially the same symbol, but now it has a few extra lines. This is the symbol used by one of the largest denominations of Christians in the world, the Pharaoh's sighting. Is it possible the Vatican is hiding proof that an ancient Egyptian pharaoh witnessed an alien ship? It sounds outrageous, but it might not be impossible. The Thule papyrus is believed to be a real piece of evidence that people have been witnessing flying saucers for thousands of years. The Thule papyrus is a modern transcript from an ancient Egyptian text written in 1480 BC. The text seems to describe a mass UFO sighting. Thutmose III was the ruler of Egypt at the time, and under him, a recording was made of the mass sighting, which he believed to be a day of great importance. According to the pharaoh, in the 3rd month of winter, and at the 6th hour of the day, a circle of fire appeared in the sky. The circle of fire emitted a foul breath. It had no head, and its body was 1 rod wide. The scribes became confused and threw themselves on their bellies, and so it was recorded in the scrolls of the House of Life. This was all translated by anthropologist R. Cedric Leonard in the 1930s. Although the pharaoh doesn't come right out and say it, he does seem to be describing an alien ship slowly moving into the atmosphere. It was obviously shocking enough that those who witnessed it threw themselves on their stomachs in terror. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't a meteorite because there was no destruction. The event was silent, with a mysterious object shining as bright as the sun hovering above the people of Egypt in the sky. Unfortunately, all copies of the ancient text are gone, but they were supposedly last seen within the collection of the Vatican Museum. But when researcher Samuel Rosenberg requested to see the document, the Vatican claimed they didn't have it. The destruction of knowledge. Christians have been burning books ever since there were books to burn. Even now, there are book burnings happening in the United States of America. It should come as no surprise that Christian clerics have burned books, destroyed sacred knowledge, and have rid themselves of manuscripts they don't like. In the first few centuries of the Church, and in all the centuries that followed until very recently, possessing any non-Christian text was considered a sin. And so, in the 4th century AD, Christians were very displeased at the fact there was a library in Alexandria which contained countless volumes of pagan scripts. This library in question was, of course, the Library of Alexandria, which is located in Egypt. The library was home to about 400,000 texts during its height at the end of the Roman Republic. It was established around 285 BC and flourished for over 200 years before it began to decline. Julius Caesar burned it down in 48 BC, but many of the texts survived and the library was rebuilt. But it dwindled under the control of the Romans because of a lack of funding. By 260 AD, its membership had reached historical lows. This suggests that the extremely sophisticated Romans no longer had a thirst for knowledge. Alexandria was then invaded in 270, and the library was destroyed a second time. But many of its most important texts were stashed away in the Serapeum. But then came Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria, who was a hardcore Christian. He ordered that the last vestiges of the library be destroyed and that every pagan text should be obliterated. Nobody knows what kind of sacred knowledge was lost at the hands of the Catholic Church, but it was definitely a lot. And now we'll likely never know the secrets that were destroyed in the Library of Alexandria. Egypt's Pope. A fact that's not very well known outside the Mediterranean is that Egypt has its very own Pope. The Pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church is also known as the Bishop of Alexandria. He is the leader of Egypt's Coptic Orthodox Church. And as we've learned today, Christianity has its oldest and deepest roots in Egypt, not in Rome. It makes sense that Egypt has its own pope, and the position is currently held by Pope Tawadros II. He was selected as the 118th Pope of Egypt in November of 2012. This isn't just a small appointment either. The Egyptian Pope, also called the Holy Synod, is the absolute highest authority in the Church of Alexandria. He controls about 14 million Coptic Christians in Egypt, with a total of 18 million worldwide. The seat of the Egyptian Pope has been in Cairo since 1047 AD, although it was originally in Alexandria. The Egyptian Pope even has his own special palace called the Patriarchal Palace. and another special residence at the monastery of Saint Pishoy. In the early days of the Christian Church, there were a handful of cities allowed to have their own religious jurisdictions. Many of these special jurisdictions, called patriarchates, were supposedly established by the apostles as they tried to spread the teachings of Jesus across the ancient world. There was Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch. In Alexandria, the very first leader of the church was Mark the Evangelist, the same man who authored the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament. Because of this, every new bishop of Alexandria is considered the direct successor of Mark. Joan Risch. Joan Risch was an American housewife who disappeared from her home in Lincoln, Massachusetts on October 24th, 1961. Her disappearance remains one of the most puzzling and mysterious cases in American history. Joan was married to Martin Risch and they had 2 children, Lillian and David. In April of 1961, they moved to Lincoln, but later that year, everything would change. On the day of her disappearance, neighbors reported hearing strange noises and the sound of a car horn repeatedly honking around mid-morning. But what happened that day? On the morning of October 24th, Martin left for a work trip, departing at around 8 a.m. to catch his flight. Joan left her son with her neighbor, Barbara, and took Lillian to a dentist appointment. She came back home and picked up her son and made lunch for the kids. Joan changed her outfit and put David down for a nap. At around 1 p.m., Barbara came over and brought her son so he could play with Lillian for a little while. The children saw Joan go in and out of the garage, taking care of some plants. Shortly before 2 p.m., Joan took the children to Barbara's house and said she would be back. About 15 minutes later, Barbara says she saw Joan carrying something red in her outstretched arms into the garage while wearing a trench coat. Barbara then took Lillian back home at 3:40 p.m., and she assumed Joan was still there, so she left Lillian and said goodbye. When she got back from the shopping trip, she said Lillian came running over to her house, saying, "Mommy's gone and the kitchen is covered with red paint." Her brother was alone crying in his crib, and Joan was nowhere to be found. When Barbara went over to the house, she saw the kitchen covered with blood. She called the police at 4:33 p.m. The police arrived shortly after. Sergeant Mike McHugh noted blood on the floor and walls in the kitchen. The phone was ripped from the wall and dumped in the garbage can. Chairs were overturned and the table was flipped. There were clear signs of a struggle. A trail of blood led from the kitchen out into the driveway and straight to Joan's car. The trench coat was in the house, and so was her purse. There were no bloody footprints, and nobody had seen anyone enter the home, which was strange with all the coming and going the children were doing. Someone should have seen something. There were possible later sightings that were unconfirmed. Some witnesses said there was a woman matching Joan's description at 2:45 p.m., wearing a coat and a kerchief on her head, walking by the side of the road. At around 3:30, there was a woman who looked disoriented with blood running down her legs, walking along another road. The whole thing was very suspicious, which led many to speculate that Joan staged the attack to run away and start a new life. A reporter with the local newspaper went to the library and discovered that Joan had checked out over 25 books, all related to murder and missing persons cases. And the month right before her disappearance, she had checked out a book about a woman who went missing, who also left behind overturned furniture and blood smears. With nothing else to go on, the case went cold. It was very strange that she had spent the day with her children, going to the dentist and then back and forth to the neighbors, to just disappear. Some of her friends believe she was dead, while other investigators believe that she planned her disappearance to escape an unsatisfying life. For the past 60 years, nobody has come forward with any information regarding what happened to Joan Risch, and now all the original investigators on the case have all passed away. The case remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in the United States. I want to give a big thank you to David Hatt and Matt Leonard for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about strange and mysterious disappearances. Sneha Philip. It's been 2 decades since Sneha Philip vanished in New York City. On September 10, 2001, Sneha was 31 years old. She was a successful doctor who spent that day repotting orchids and chatting with her mom on Instant Messenger. Later that afternoon, she went shopping in a department store and bought some lingerie. This was all captured on security camera footage. but that was the last time anybody saw her. According to some rumors, she used the chaos of what happened the next day to flee from her life and start a new one. But others think she was killed during the attack on the World Trade Center and that her body was never found. There are even people out there who think someone used 9/11 as a cover to murder the young doctor. Sneha's husband, Ron Lieberman, was alarmed on the morning of September 11th when he couldn't find his wife. But then he heard news of the plane that struck the North Tower only 2 blocks from their apartment. It was presumed that she was one of the victims. And as a doctor, her family guessed that she had seen what was happening at Ground Zero and rushed to help the injured people, even as the buildings collapsed. But when police looked deeper at Sneha's story, they became suspicious. It turned out the doctor had been suffering from alcohol issues. She was recently suspended from her job at Staten Island's St. Vincent's Medical Center, and she was suffering from marital problems. There were rumors that she'd been ditching her husband to meet women in lesbian bars. There were also some legal issues because of a false complaint against one of her colleagues, which resulted in a night in jail. In 2004, Sneha Philip was removed from the list of 9/11 victims, only to be reinstated after a court battle fought by her family in 2008. She was officially killed, as far as the law is concerned, in the 9/11 attack. But what really happened to Sneha Philip is unknown, as her body was never recovered. Her family and friends continue to seek closure and hope for answers about her disappearance. Pisces 3 submersible. In 1973, there was an epic underwater rescue mission when the Canadian submarine Pisces III sank. This submersible was conducting a routine mission to lay sea cable, but as it was being pulled to the surface by its mothership, the rear compartment hatch was unintentionally ripped open. The rear of the craft was fully flooded, causing the submersible to plummet to the bottom of the ocean. It sank to an astounding depth of 1,575 feet. As a result, the 2 people in the cockpit of the submarine only had 72 hours of oxygen left before they faced certain death. Luckily, the crew members inside were professionals. Both had served in the British Navy, and they still had access to communications. They weren't in any trouble of losing contact with the outside world, but it wasn't like they could give an exact position for where they were, sitting in the pitch-black depths of the sea. Immediately upon the disaster, a rescue mission was launched. For 3 days, the world was captivated by the intensity of the mission. Very similar to the recent search for the Titan, rescuers radioed down to pilot Roger Chapman and senior pilot Roger Mallinson, telling them to refrain from moving or speaking. They needed to stretch their oxygen availability as much as possible, and by not moving at all, they were able to sit almost completely still and gain an extra 12 hours of air. The mission was a success, but just barely. By the time researchers finally found the missing submersible at the bottom of the ocean on September 1st, the pilots were on the verge of death. When Pisces 3 finally broke the surface of the ocean and the 2 men were released, they only had 12 minutes of oxygen remaining. If the rescue mission had started only 15 minutes later, both of them would have died. Every last second counted toward getting them out of the submersible still breathing, and if they hadn't sat completely still and refrained from talking, they also would have died. To this day, the rescue of Roger Chapman and Roger Mallinson remains the deepest successful rescue ever completed. The Beaumont Children. On a hot summer day in 1966, the Beaumont children spent the day on the beach in South Australia. However, they never returned home and were never seen again. The disappearance of the Beaumont children is still one of the most famous and horrifying unsolved cases of Australia. The details of the family are easy to find. The Beaumonts lived in Adelaide, in a wealthy beachside suburb. Jim was a taxi driver, and he and his wife Nancy had 3 children. There was 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Arna, and 4-year-old Grant. Together, they were one happy family. They lived relatively close to the beach, so the kids often spent the day in the sand by themselves. It was also the 1960s, when parents weren't particularly worried about their kids being kidnapped. Nancy even gave the children money for bus fare and a small lunch, and she told them to be home by the early afternoon. By 3:00 p.m., the kids still hadn't returned, and the family was very worried. They searched the beach and drove around the suburbs, but there was no sign of the kids. And when things seemed hopeless, They went straight to the police station. The cops organized a search party immediately, and the whole area was scoured top to bottom, but the children were nowhere to be found, and it began to look like something sinister had happened. If the children had been swept out to sea, they would have left some of their items behind, but out of the 17 things the children had brought with them that day, not a single one was found anywhere. This suggested that the kids and all of their belongings had been taken by somebody. Police soon learned that at 11 a.m., an eyewitness saw a strange man in his 30s join the children on the beach, but the witness hadn't thought anything of it at the time because they all seemed to be getting along. The witness didn't realize the man was a total stranger, though. She described him as 6 feet tall, blonde, and slim. He was also wearing a blue Speedo, and the witness claimed that he left with the children after they packed up their stuff. And things only got worse for the family when 2 other witnesses came forward saying they also saw the children with a tall blonde man wearing a Speedo. The police theorized that whoever the mysterious man was, he must have been familiar with the Beaumonts. The kids weren't acting frightened or nervous, and it was as if they knew the person already. Nobody was ever arrested in connection with the case. A man named Harry Phipps became a suspect in 2013, but he was never charged with anything. Harry came to the attention of the authorities when his son came forward to say he'd seen his father with the children that day in 1966, and others claimed that Harry had paid some workers to dig a hole in his factory yard around the same time the children vanished. But when police dug up the yard using excavators, they never found anything. Theodosia Burr. Aaron Burr was the 3rd Vice President of the United States of America from 1801 to 1805. His daughter was Theodosia Burr, a woman who went missing 8 years after Aaron's fateful duel with Alexander Hamilton. On December 31, 1812, Theodosia got onto a schooner named the Patriot in Georgetown, South Carolina. At the time, she was 29 years old and was on her way to visit her dad. The journey should have been simple, with the schooner traveling up the Atlantic coast to New York City, but the boat never showed up. It disappeared at some point between South Carolina and New York State, and Theodosia was never seen again. Aaron Burr walked the streets of New York the rest of his life, according to his biography, as the hollow shell of a man. It's been over 200 years and the fate of Theodosia Burr is still unknown. It's unclear if she sank in a storm or if the boat was captured by pirates. Most historians think a storm is the most likely cause of her disappearance, but there is no way to know for sure. What do you think happened to the Patriot, the ship Aaron Burr's daughter Theodosia vanished on? Tell me your theories in the comments, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Now, on to number 5. Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is considered by many to be the best-selling novelist of all time. She was the brilliant mastermind behind 66 detective novels, and she also penned 14 short stories. Over 2 billion copies of her books have been sold worldwide, and that makes Christie the 3rd most popular author of all time, after William Shakespeare and the Bible. She even composed the longest-running play in history, The Mousetrap. Any Agatha Christie fans out there? I love the TV adaptations of Agatha Christie's Poirot. In 1926, Agatha Christie disappeared into thin air. The most popular writer in the world vanished, sparking a nationwide search. She was feared dead, or worse, kidnapped and being tortured. Her family was distraught, and the public was absolutely terrified. But 11 days after her abandoned car was discovered stuck in some bushes near a quarry, Agatha was found alive at the Old Swan Hotel in Harrogate, England. Somebody recognized the author as she was checking in, but they were confused because she'd purchased a room under the name Teresa Neal. And what's even more strange is that she also claimed to be from South Africa. When her husband Archie, whom some had suspected was behind her murder, arrived at the hotel, Agatha claimed not to know who he was. She had amnesia and couldn't remember anything about her life. The amnesia eventually went away, and Agatha returned to normal. But she divorced her husband in 1930 and married an archaeologist almost 15 years younger. Nobody knows why she vanished for those 11 days in 1926. Although some believe she crashed her car and really did get amnesia. Others think it was just a ploy to sell more books. The most likely reason, though, is that Agatha Christie had a huge fight with her husband and may have had some type of mental breakdown. Crystal Rogers. In 2015, Crystal Rogers vanished mysteriously in Bardstown, Kentucky. In July 2023, the FBI re-upped their vow to solve the unsettling disappearance of the young mother, even though it happened 8 years prior. Investigators in Louisville said at the beginning of July that they've made significant progress throughout the last year. They also said that the main suspect at the moment is Brooks Houck. Crystal's boyfriend at the time she vanished. The incident took place at some point between July 3rd and July 5th, 2015. On July 5th, Crystal's father discovered her keys, her purse, and her uncharged cell phone inside her sedan. The vehicle was found parked on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway with a flat tire, but how it got there and where Crystal went is what the FBI seem unable to answer. The last time anyone saw Crystal alive was on July 3rd. One of her friends saw Crystal walking out of a Walmart in the afternoon, and during their brief conversation, Crystal said she was going to be hanging out with her boyfriend, whom she lived with, that night. So that's normal. When the police questioned Brooks, he said Crystal was with him when they went to bed on July 3rd. It was a normal night and he fell asleep while she was playing on her phone. But when he got up the next day, Crystal was gone and her car was no longer in the driveway. It wasn't that unusual, but then nobody ever saw Crystal again. Although Brooks is the main suspect, there is no evidence tying him to Crystal's disappearance. He hasn't been arrested, and the police have made little headway in proving his involvement in the case. Crystal Rogers is still out there somewhere, either dead or alive. The one thing the police have said is that some people in Bardstown have information on what happened, but are refusing to come forward. And that's pretty shocking considering there is a $100,000 reward currently offered for any information leading to Crystal's discovery. Louis Le Prince. Louis Le Prince, often referred to as the father of cinematography, was declared dead in 1897, just 1 month before he was set to unveil his latest creation to the world. This invention was the first functional model of a device capable of capturing motion, essentially the earliest version of a video camera. However, due to his untimely death, Thomas Edison received credit for inventing the first usable equipment for capturing moving images. Born in 1841 in France, Louis came from a family with a military background, as his father held the rank of major in the French army. He studied painting and chemistry, and after school he moved to England. Louis married Elizabeth Whitley in 1869, and together they established a school of applied art called the Leeds Technical School of Art. In the 1880s, he created a 16-lens camera and applied for a patent. His inventions kept on coming, but then, in September of 1890, just as Louis was preparing to visit America to unveil his latest work, he disappeared. On September 16th, he traveled by train to Paris. His brother met him at the station, but where Louis went after and what happened to him is a mystery that's never been solved. There was an extensive search to discover the missing inventor. The French police were involved, and so was Scotland Yard, but even after 7 years, there were no clues or leads. So, in 1897, Louis Le Prince was officially declared dead. A lot of theories have been proposed as to what happened in the years since. One of the most popular theories, considered a conspiracy theory, is that Louis was assassinated. It's believed that Thomas Edison or one of Edison's associates murdered Louis. It may have been part of the patent war, with Louis being killed because his new device would have ruined Edison's career. Another theory is that Louis was killed by his own family because he was ousted as gay. That's never been proven though, but then again, neither have any of the other theories. In 1890, a drowned man was pulled from France's River Seine, but unfortunately he was never identified. Maybe it was Louis, but there is really no way to know for sure. Rudy Farias. On March 6, 2015, Rudy Farias disappeared while walking his dogs in northwest Houston. He was just 17 years old at the time. His mother became extremely concerned when the dog suddenly showed up at the home without the teenage boy. 8 years later, on July 2nd, 2023, Rudy Farias was discovered alive. But what in the world happened to him during his absence? And where has he been for nearly the last decade? According to Rudy's mother, who spoke to news outlets over the phone, he was discovered riddled with cuts and bruises. Rudy was also found with blood in his hair, evidence pointing to extreme abuse. He was found sitting outside a church unresponsive, and somebody called 911. Rudy was then taken to a hospital to be treated. That's what Rudy's mother said when the story first broke, but it was all lies. As of July 12th, Rudy has sat down for an interview to divulge what really happened over the last 8 years. It turns out that Rudy was never missing at all. The day after he vanished, he returned home, but his mother lied to the police by claiming he was still missing. The shocking truth is that Rudy never left his house from between 17 and 25 years old. Rudy revealed to the authorities that his mother had brainwashed him into staying indoors. Rudy said it was like living in a prison. He had the option to leave, but his mother manipulated him into being too afraid to walk outside. Rudy said that whenever family members or his old friends would come over, he had to hide and pretend like he wasn't there. Then there's the shocking revelation of the abuse. Rudy said that his mother never physically forced herself onto him, but she did coerce him into doing things that made him extremely uncomfortable. But for now, the police have declined to charge the mother with any wrongdoing. Rudy appears to be physically healthy, but he's requested to be removed from his mother's care, to never see her again. Rudy also said that since he's been out of the house, it feels like he's finally at peace. The Thomas Hume. In the 17th century, Le Griffon was the first known ship to travel the upper Great Lakes. However, it was wrecked during a storm on Lake Michigan, and in the centuries that followed, between 6,000 and 8,000 ships followed its fate by sinking to the bottom of the Great Lakes. Historians have estimated around 30,000 people have died from being shipwrecked in the Great Lakes over the past 400 years or so, and one of the ships that vanished was the Thomas Hume. The Thomas Hume was a schooner that was built in Wisconsin in the late 1800s. In 1876, the ship was sold to Captain Welch out of Chicago, then it changed hands to Charles Hackley, who refitted the vessel for transporting lumber. The schooner traveled across Lake Michigan from Muskegon to Chicago up until 1891, when it disappeared on May 21st. The ship was last seen leaving the harbor in Chicago after unloading its cargo of lumber. It had a small crew of only 7 and sailed away from the city into a rapidly developing storm. The ship failed to arrive in Muskegon, so Charles Hackley and his partner Thomas Hume, after whom the ship was named, sent Captain Seth Lee to look for the vessel, but the captain never found a single piece of the wreckage. Usually, if a ship was destroyed in a storm, there'd at least be some pieces of it floating on the surface. All 7 crew members were presumed dead, and the ship and its cargo resulted in a loss of $6,000. That amount may not seem like a lot today, but it was a huge amount of money back then. The reason the disappearance of the ship became so famous is that a lot of people believed it never really vanished. There were rumors that the crew stole the cargo and repainted the ship. Then they sold everything for themselves. Another rumor was that the vessel was hit by a much larger freighter, killing everyone on board. The captain of the larger freighter then swore his crew to secrecy. One of the spookier rumors, though, claimed that the ship was swallowed into oblivion, just like the countless vessels lost in the Bermuda Triangle. But none of these turned out to be true. In 2006, divers discovered the intact Thomas Hume at the bottom of the lake. They found the ship in almost pristine condition. Researchers are still trying to figure out how it sank, seeing as it looks perfectly fine. It's almost like the ship dropped to the bottom of the ocean like a stone for no reason. Thanks for watching. Which case did you find the most mysterious? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up for more. See you in the next one!